Hello everyone. This lecture is the extension of my previous lecture in which I discussed what is discourse and what is discourse analysis. Most often when we appear for an interview or an oral examination, the examiner wants our perspective on discourse and discourse analysis. So if you are defining discourse from a formalist perspective, you can answer that discourse is a language above the level of sentence or clause. And if you are defining discourse from a functionalist perspective, you can answer that discourse is language in use. While if you are defining discourse from a socialist perspective, then you can answer that discourse is a form of social practice. So it is discourse which builds identity, ideologies, power relation, and construct different social structures. So this is discourse from a socialist perspective. So to define discourse, it depends that from which perspective you are defining discourse and discourse analysis. So in this lecture, once again, we will discuss what is discourse analysis, and we will discuss different views of discourse analysis, how different discourse analysts, they view discourse and discourse analysis. Let's begin our today's lecture. This slide encompasses all the three definitions I discussed on previous slide. Discourse analysis examines pattern of language across the text. So this is the first definition, and here discourse is defined from a formalist perspective. And discourse is viewed a language above the level of sentence or above the level of clause. And when we say pattern of language, so here it means that how the overall text is organized. What kind of cohesive devices are used, how coherence is used, and how parallel structures are used. So overall, the pattern of language is analyzed, right? And consider the relationship between language and the social and cultural context in which it is used. That is a functionalist view of discourse. That language in use, how we use language to do certain things, certain activities. Discourse analysis also consider the ways that the use of language present different views of the world, how different ideologies are built, right? How different identities are built, and how the world is viewed differently. So this is the third perspective of discourse and discourse analysis, and this is from a socialist perspective and different understanding. It examines how the use of language is influenced by relationship between participant as well as the effect the use of language has upon social identities and relations. It also considers how our views of the world and identities are constructed through the use of discourse. So we use language to construct identities, to construct ideologies, and to view the world differently, right? And to build different realities. So this is a socialist perspective on discourse and discourse analysis, right? Now, who introduced the term discourse analysis? It's like a historical background. That who for the first time used discourse analysis, the term discourse analysis. The term discourse analysis was first introduced by Zilling-Harris in 1952 as a way of analyzing connected speech and writing. That how different sentences are connected, well knitted with each other, how different clauses are connected, how different words are connected in writing and speech. So Harris had two main interests. First, the examination of language beyond the level of sentence and the relationship between linguistic and non-linguistic behavior. So he had two aims to analyze a language. First, that he wanted to examine language beyond the level of sentence or beyond the level of clause. And second, the relationship between linguistic and non-linguistic behavior. So when we say non-linguistic, so we're talking about the context, social context, cultural context, right? Our tone, our pitch. So these all include in non-linguistic behavior. So he examined the first of these in most detail. What is the first of these? That the use of language beyond the sentence or beyond the clause. He focused on this, aiming to provide a way for describing how language features are distributed within the text. So what are language features? As I told you, for example, parallel structure, for example, the use of conjunction, the use of omission, the use of coherence, the use of cohesion, different cohesive devices. So these all are called language features. And the way in which they are combined in particular kinds and style of text, and how these different kinds of sentences are combined to make it, to make it like a whole, right? Or to make the overall text meaningful. So how these different language features are used to make discourse meaningful, right? Now, different views of discourse analysis. There are in fact a number of different views on what discourse analysis actually is. Social science researchers, for example, might argue that all their work is concerned with the analysis of discourse, yet often take up the term in their own, sometimes different ways. Like, for example, that's said by Faircloughs in 2003 and Mel in 1997 make a similar observation, showing how through its relatively short history, the term discourse analysis has shifted from highlighting one aspect of language use to another. So that is like a social perspective of discourse. Both, like Sarah Mills and Norman Fairclough, they both hold this view, right? That the use of language in a social and culture setup. So use it to another, as well as being used in different ways by different researchers. So this is one perspective of discourse and discourse analysis, right? You can see that social science researchers, for example, might argue that all their work is concerned with the analysis of discourse, right? Yet often take up the term in their own, right? So that is from social perspective. Now, what is the view of Norman Fairclough? Fairclough contrasts what he calls textually oriented discourse analysis with the approach to discourse analysis that have more of social theoretical orientation. So on the one hand, we have textually oriented discourse where the focus is only given to language, right? Or the focus is only given that how language, different features of language are used in a discourse, right? Like, for example, parallelism and different cohesive devices, verb form, okay, and repetition. So these are, so he contrasts with this view, okay, the discourse is only textually oriented thing. So he combines this with approaches to discourse analysis that have more of a social theoretical orientation. Fairclough, he thinks that discourse is the production of a social structure. Without a social structure, without society, okay, you can't produce discourse. So he thinks that language and society are deeply connected with each other, right? You can't see a language without society, and you can't see a society without a language. So this is okay that he goes beyond the textually oriented discourse, right? With the approach to discourse analysis that have more of a social theoretical orientation. He does not see these two views as mutually exclusive. It means that you cannot separate language from society, and you can't separate society from language. So it means, okay, that he does not only focus to textually oriented discourse, but also he focuses on what? That approach discourse analysis that have more of social theoretical orientation, because every language is the product of society. That's why he looks for social theoretical orientation of discourse. So he does not see these two views as mutually exclusively. However, arguing for an analysis of discourse that is both linguistic and social in its orientation. So the focus is also on this textual analysis, and the focus is also on this, that is social theoretical orientation. So both are viewed here, and he does not separate one from another. Like some of the discourse analysts will focus this one, textually oriented discourse, while other will focus on this one, social theoretical orientation of discourse. But he says that both are important because it is society which gives birth to discourse, and it is discourse which produces or which shape a society. So similarly, that Carmains and Kukel 2003 present a similar view. So both these writers, Carmain and Kulik, they do not take these two perspectives to be incompatible. So both go with each other, discourse and language. Language and society with each other. So arguing that the instance of language in use that are studied under a textually oriented view of discourse are still socially situated and need to be interpreted in terms of their social meaning and functions. Now we will discuss David Crystal's view on discourse analysis. Crystal's view on discourse analysis is textually oriented discourse analysis. Let's discuss what he says. David Crystal's analysis of Barack Obama's victory speech when he won the US presidential election is an example of textually oriented discourse analysis. One of the features Crystal notes in Obama's speech is the use of parallelism, parallel structure. So when you are focusing to identify parallel structure, anaphoric references, cataphoric references, cohesion, coherence, cohesive devices, conjunctions, omissions, substitutions. So you are doing what? You are focusing, or you are doing discourse analysis which is textually oriented. So Crystal, he notes down parallel structure in Barack Obama's presidential speech, where he repeats certain grammatical structure for rhetorical effect. So he repeats some grammatical structures in order to have rhetorical effect, to impact the mind of the listeners, or to attract the listeners. In the following extract from the opening lines of his speech, Obama repeats who clauses. So a clause that begins with the word who, and he repeats this who clauses 3 times, and this is called rule of 3, highlighting below, lowering the processing load of the speech so that listener will focus on the content of the clause that follow. So he lowered the load in order that the audience focus what he says. Crystal also shows how Obama follows the rhetorical rule of 3 to repeat a clause 3 times. Who clause 3 times. It was also rhetorical rule of 3 in the section of his speech in a way that mirrored the speeches of former political leaders such as Winston Churchill. Parallel structures. Now, what are parallel structures? If there is anyone out there who still doubt that America is a place where all things are possible, who still wonders if the dream of our founder is alive in our time, who still question the power of our democracy tonight is your answer. You can see here who clause. First, who still doubts. Second, who still wonders. And third, who still question. So this is a who clause and it is repeated 3 times. Rules of 3. And the same pattern was also adopted by Winston Churchill. Now, the power of a democracy tonight is your answer. So this extract is taken from CNN. Obama also used the use of pairs to use 2 words, right? Pair to have a rhetorical impact. Obama also uses less of pairs in his speech to rhetorical effect, as in it's the answer spoken by young and old. So young and old, it's a pair. Rich and poor, it's a pair. And Democrat and Republican, it's a pair. And black and white, it's a pair. And Hispanic and Asians, and Native American, gay and straight, and disabled and not disabled. So he used pairs of words, right? Quite like in binary opposition, because the young is the opposite of old and rich is the opposite of poor, right? So he used this in pair to have a rhetorical effect. Now, Hagens' analysis of Obama's speech. Hagens' analysis of Obama's speech is an example of more socially oriented discourse analysis. Now, we noticed on previous slide that the focus of David Crystal was textually oriented discourse analysis, while the focus of Hagens is socially oriented discourse analysis is a different one. So Hagens traces Obama's speech back to the oratory of ancient Greeks and Roman, showing how the use of tricolons, series of 3, as an example above was one of the Cyrus, as well as the Julius Caesar's rhetorical techniques, as in Caesar's veni, vidi, vici. I came, I saw, and I conquer. So this technique was also used in ancient Greek time. So actually that Hagens relates Obama's speech to the orators of ancient Greek time. So he doing what? He is doing a discourse analysis which is socially oriented, right? He thinks, okay, that this discourse is the production of a social structures, or discourse is produced in a social structure. Now, I saw, I came, I conquer. In doing this, Obama recalls both the politics and tradition of ancient Athens, where oratory was the supreme political skill on whose mastery power depended, right? Now, what Williams says, William discusses Obama's speech within the context of political and economic movement of his victory, highlighting the central message of optimism in his speech, captures in the repetition of refrain, yes, we can. Hagens also discussed how this yes, we can relate intertextually. So every discourse is produced in the reaction of previous one. Something happened in the past and you are producing a discourse now, right? So this is called intertextuality, okay? Or when you insert inferences and references from the past discourse. To call and response preaching of American church and the power that effective preachers have on their congregation. Obama's reference in his speech to previous leaders thus draw on the social stock of knowledge, Hussein Lockman 2009 says. So he shares with his audience and their social and cultural histories. So this is now a socially oriented discourse analysis. The focus is not given to parallel structures, coherence, cohesion, but the focus is given that how something happened in the past. And in the reaction of that, because something happened in the past and those leaders or those great supreme leaders were very much successful, right? And they had a rhetorical effect on the mind of the listeners, on the audience. And the same pattern is also repeated here. So it shows that discourse, it is hidden in a social structures. It's the production of society. Now we can summarize that we can see then that discourse analysis is the view of language at the level of text. Right? So this is now the first definition of discourse analysis. And this is like from the perspective of formalist or formalist perspective on discourse analysis. Discourse analysis is also a view of language in use, and this is functionalist perspective of discourse analysis. That how language, when we use language, right? So we do certain things by using language. So this is language in use. And how people achieve certain communicative goals through the use of language, perform certain communicative act, and participate in certain communicative events and present themselves to others. So this is the second definition to discourse analysis. And discourse analysis consider how people manage interactions with each other and how people communicate with particular group and society, as well as how they communicate with other group and with other culture. It also focuses on how people do things beyond language and the ideas they believe, the idea and belief that they communicate as they use language. So this is the overall summary of today's lecture. So this was all about what is discourse analysis and different perspective on discourse analysis, and we discuss that discourse analysis from different perspective. We notice that textually oriented discourse analysis and socially oriented discourse analysis. So thank you so much. Please don't forget to subscribe and like the channel, and please provide your valuable comments and feedback in the comment section. Thank you so much.